You know what's interesting, Jeff, is that I saw a graph recently which said the uptake of EVs in Australia lags behind other developing countries. I'm not too sure if you agree or disagree. I believe it was a graph from The Economist, which charted out EV penetration within the population. Um, do you very much see that Australians are lagging behind in terms of the acceptance of EVs, or do you think it's more in a sense of government support? Um,
Yeah, it's a good one to unpack. We
yeah,
certainly lag. We certainly lag a number of more developed countries. At one extreme, you have Norway, the poster child country of EV uptake globally. I think I read last week they've just tipped over 85% of new cars sold are now battery electric
crazy,
vehicles, right?
crazy.
So
Yeah.
that's incredible. Back locally in Australia, I think last year, ACT might have tipped to 5% of new cars as a territory, 5% of new cars electric
Yeah.
vehicle. But, we are at 37,000 battery electric vehicles on the road in Australia against a fleet of 18,
Yeah.
18 to 25 million. I've seen lots of different numbers around the size of
Yeah.
fleet, but
Why do you think that's the case? I know we can look at it from an empirical point of view, very objectively. I'm very interested to see what you think. From what you see, Jeff. Why do you think we're not getting the same uptake as other developing
yeah,
countries?
I think it really surprised me because, I hate to keep drawing on our, heritage and where we started, but
I've already drank the Kool-Aid. I'm good.
well, telco, we, as a technology country, Australia has always been a leader, and I
Hmm.
think following uh, Japan and some other countries, we big adopters of the smartphone and
Yeah,
early
we are.
high penetration. So, when I came into the industry, I was a little bit bemused as to why that might be the case. Now, if we talk about vehicles, we're a big country, right? And we're a road trip
Vast open
uh,
roads. Everyone has a
nation.
car.
Yeah, so you've got a lot of territory to cover.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah.
that's hard for a mobile infrastructure player to roll out coverage in Australia, so they
Hmm.
had similar challenges. But I guess when we speak to auto manufacturers, there's a few key themes. The three things we've always looked to is, firstly, infrastructure needs to be in place so that manufacturers feel confident they can come and sell the car.
Hmm.
This is new tech still, right? And Tesla are still the largest volume of vehicles sold. You can imagine a product that's still maturing, maybe lower margins than something that's got scale, like that you want to be able to sell it. So you're going to go to the countries, you're going to give your allocation to the markets that you can turn it over, and you look at the markets that have the charging infrastructure, have the government support, and the vehicles are suitable for the use. Now in Australia, I think infrastructure has lagged,
Hmm.
but I guess huge trajectory now. The grant funding that's that's come in from government, federal and state, sees us on a really good trajectory of fast charging availability. Bit more work to do rural and regionally in Australia, but I think that's on the way. Government support, I think we're really keen to see the Labor government, what their role will be beyond infrastructure.
Hmm.
Grants, there are some state grants available and rebates, but really getting behind getting the cars to the country will be important. And part of that is the emissions standards, or the lack of in Australia, which means that we do get left with the dirtier vehicles, because other nations like in Europe, where there are emission standards, they have to support the petrol vehicles with electric vehicles to meet that standard. And
Hmm.
so I think that's an area we're really pushing hard for. But the third thing, which I think is still a bit of an unknown, is the model type. We know we're a ute-loving country. We've got lots of number one, or the top sellers. We look at the Hilux, we look at the Ford Rangers. you know, the availability of all the models in electrification is still coming. So I think that'll be the third thing, when the prevalence of all model types are available to be to the country, alongside infrastructure and government support, are the things that are going to help us accelerate the trajectory and vehicles in Australia. I would say, finally, though, demand for EVs is there right now. You can't get a car. If you looked at a few of Tesla, you order now, you get a car 2023, and the demand is huge for those. Equally, the Hyundai Ioniq, they brought out, you know, with minutes, they sold out the allocation that was coming. So I have no doubt that the demand for electric vehicles in Australia is here and now. It's now just about getting the cars into the country.
Because I know the Ioniq. Obviously, Teslas are still, I believe, at least $65,000-$70,000 on road. Is that correct, Jeff? Or?
Yep, base Model 3 is about that. Depending on the state, there are some government grants which are worth investigating. Might take $3,000 to $5,000 off the base model. So yeah, but you know, less maintenance and also cheaper refueling costs also should be considered.
It's sort of interesting because it's very much a chicken and egg problem. Because for me, you know, do correct if I'm wrong, Jeff, I think EV cars are still very much a premium type of car, because you're still paying northwards of 65, 75K for at least a base Ioniq, for example, right? But like what you said, a lot of manufacturers aren't looking to bring all their models down under because they know they can't sell them. And if we're very much still a ute-loving country who loves our four-wheel drives and our V6s and our V8s, you know, a Hyundai or a Kia or whatever, and they're not going to bring in the lower grade model here. They probably will do it, right? But they're probably going to bring their lower tier EV cars to the countries which already have the network, which therefore allows them to sell their vehicles. So it's a bit of a tricky one, isn't it?
It is a tricky one.
But yeah, I was sort of thinking about that graph. Really got to me. Why is it so low? And like what you pointed out, it's very much a plethora of sort of different factors that need to come together to make it work, eh?
Well, look, you know, there's no doubt that price point is the other key factor, and when it's good for the back wallet, people get on board. But you know, you can't just look at the sticker price. You've got to look at the total cost of ownership. And you know, we've had a lot of experience with a lot of different transport sectors, and you know, those cars that are doing lots of kilometers, and we take a real interest in, say, the rideshare industry. You know, those cars, some of those cars are doing 60,000 Ks a year. You know, that the upfront cost of an EV, which might be slightly higher, is offset by cheaper refueling and maintenance benefits, and it's a better equation. So,
so the payback could be, by all means, you might be paying a high upfront cost, but you might recoup the difference than a petrol car in 3-5 years' time, for example.
Exactly.
I suppose from a rational mind that makes perfect sense, but obviously we're a consumer where we want that immediate gratification, and high sticker price. I might not go down that path.
Yeah, but you know, equally, it's changing rapidly. I mean, we've had the MG come to market, which you know adds to the the lower end price point for EVs, on top of the Hyundai Ioniq, which you know sub 50,000 K car, and then more recently BYD is you know Warren Buffett backed Chinese manufacturer of vehicles coming to Australia. We'll again see that price point step down again, and you know, so things are changing. More cars, better price points, infrastructure, all of these trends will come to a head, and I have no doubt we're going to see a strong acceleration in the uptake in Australia.
Interesting, eh? Because, and like I said, you're very much at the forefront. There's a lot of runway in terms of where you go. So is there a goal in terms of, you know, you're looking to do X number of charges by 2025, for example, or is it very much dependent on the demand and the government initiatives that you see coming within the next 3 years?
Yeah, I mean, certainly we set ourselves some internal goals that we'd love to work towards, but you know, ultimately, the goal is about electrifying transport in Australia. You know, I
It's a
mean,
it's a big hairy goal.
as a business model, we only succeed if there are lots of electric vehicles on the road in Australia and people are charging. And so that is our goal. How do we make that shift possible in this
Mm.
country? Obviously, infrastructure is a big part of it. Being an advocate for the industry, you know, I mean, there's ways that we're involved beyond just our business, but that's the big hairy goal. Yeah.
And I'm curious, Jeff, if you could really, if you could name one initiative that you believe could accelerate the adoption of EV adoption in Australia, which naturally then benefits you in terms of creating a wave, which lifts the demand for a vaster charging network, what do you think that would be? One initiative that you think is going to be the absolute game changer that's really going to tip the scales. What do you think that would be?
Look, I would say there's a couple of things that we think in the industry need to change that we're super passionate about. Like, and I've talked about one already, is vehicles in the country. There are a few ways you could do that, a few initiatives that the government could intervene on to make that possible. And we talked about emission standards being a means to do it. There are other ways, you know, whether it's fleet targets for their own vehicles, or even just rebates or incentives that lower the upfront purchase price.
Pretty simple in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the other is
interesting.
The other thing that we're equally passionate about is, you know, and it talks to infrastructure. This infrastructure that we're rolling out, the economics are really hard. I mean, that's why it's not everywhere. I mean, we're very fortunate that we've got a patient investor that believes in the direction, but to, you know, deploy this much in the infrastructure that we're creating, and, you know, run it at the quality that we expect our customers want and that we expect of ourselves is a costly business. And the viability of it, you know, putting aside the uptake of vehicles, you know, the other key aspect is the cost and the price of energy.
Interesting.
And I mean, that's a whole nother topic, but in essence, we work a lot with the energy regulators and the networks and distributors to make sure that, you know, that the tariffs associated with energy are ready and suitable for electric vehicle charging. And they're not today. They're geared around different uses, like factories running, and, you know, we're very much controlled, peaky, short peak sort of power consumption, and the tariff structures are not well suited for that. And so that's a whole nother kettle of fish, but I think is another thing.
Yes, it is, because I do know large manufacturers might get a certain sort of pricing package, so to speak, because they contribute more to the economy, so to speak. Do you foresee potentially that? I was actually reading an article from The Economist about the importance of storing energy from renewable sources. Could you see that as a viable solution going forward to maybe somehow minimize the impact of higher tariffs coming up from the grid? Obviously, that's another kettle of fish.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I certainly believe that I mean, that storage is, whether it be centralized, distributed, you know, you can put storage at different parts of the network, and obviously, you know, locally on our sites, it's going to play a role. The timing again is about the economics of it, and batteries, you know, still contribute largely to the increased costs of electric vehicles, as well as, you know, standalone battery deployment. So it's about that tipping point where they do make sense. But to your initial question, they will absolutely play a role around to help with, you know, supporting the transition from you know, coal generated electricity to, you know, larger proportion of renewables, and dealing with the transition from the sun shining to not shining, but also to helping with managing peak periods of demand on the network and easing that when you've got charges involved.
What's interesting is that you know, obviously they're a good problem to have, but give it time and you guys get the volume, you're then going to go, okay, we've got so many people charging at a certain time frame. How do we manage that load so we can spread out the amount of electricity out to these people who need the chargers. But I think it's very positive, I believe, that Labor is looking to have 80% of the energy mix in terms of renewables, which therefore fits very well with what you guys are doing in terms of providing it to car who have those EVs.
Yeah, well, interestingly, if you looked at the demand of charging, public fast charging right now, it aligns beautifully with when the sun is shining, right? It's very much, middle of the day.
It's at its peak. It's ready to go. Boom.
Yeah. So as far as the solar soak, it looks good and good for renewables, but obviously we're in the infant stages of the market, and that's still to be seen. But yes, absolutely. I mean, the shift to renewables on the grid, I mean, that's a whole other challenge and levels of complexity. But in terms of demand for charging, there's good alignment with solar that we see. But again, another telco reference. Remember,
see the similarity. It's very similar.
I mean, we had the challenge of peak hour, and everyone coming home. Like, how do we deal with people all calling at the same time, and limitations on infrastructure? And had some creative products like Yes Time. Remember, there was free 20 minutes of phone calls during 8 till 11. Ways of shifting when the network gets used. So yeah, all of that is ahead of us, the creativity. But right now, for us, it's about making sure infrastructure is available and helping that mindset and take up in Australia.